full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio this evening. Really delighted to be with you all tonight for this show with Jamie Clark and John Catt Educational, talking about his brand new book, which is available through John Catt, which is Teaching One Pages. Can't wait to get stuck into this conversation around this brand new book, which has got a huge amount of attention on social media since it's come out. A lot of people passing comments about how it's already helping them in the classroom. And that's what we're really all about here, is tools and things that can help people teach and be better in the schools that they teach in. And, I myself have read the book. Stupidly, I've left it downstairs, but maybe I'll run while Jamie's talking later and get it and then sort of wave it around to sort of symbolize that I have it in my hands, the physical copy. You can't beat a physical book. Come on. You just can't beat it. Just feels better. And Jamie's book, which I love about it, has those glossy pages that smell amazing, feel amazing, and are just generally super cool. If I ever produced a book, it would have to be like that. It just is like, it's like a magazine, like when you used to get magazines when you were like 10 years old, it's sort of like that sort of feel. It's mint. So we're going to talk about the book in the show this evening. Welcome to all listeners zooming in from all around the world, of course. This is one of our sort of video stream shows, so you can catch any podcast you like on the TTR website, ttradio.org/listen back. So if you're just sick of seeing people's faces, then go over there, listen to the audio only, and you can listen to any show back as a podcast. And of course, our third biggest country, TTR listeners, is India, and our fourth biggest is Iran. So welcome to all listeners from India and Iran, and of course the USA and the United Kingdom at top. So big welcome to everybody from all around the world listening to these shows. Really appreciate you tuning in. Before we get stuck in with this, obviously I'm going to be talking about Jamie's book, which is published through John Catt Educational. If you are interested in getting the book at any point during the show, and don't worry, I will pop this, putting the wrong way, I will pop this up again on the screen later on, but there's a discount code there. If you want to buy any book from the John Catt website, including Jamie's, then you can do that by using the code JCTTR2425, 20% off the order. By the way, that applies to as many books as you want in the order. You can put 5 books in, 10 books in, and get the 20% off. Just use that code JCTTR2425. It would be remiss of me now to not bring Jamie on screen. Hello, Jamie. Good evening to you.
Hello, Tom. How are you going?
Not too bad. Not too bad.
I've actually got the book here, and it smells amazing. You're right.
It does, but it's not just that. It's got those glossy. Did you request those glossy pages, or was that just?
No, it's just luck, I think. Yeah, it was. It's just I just got it through, and I thought the same thing. It feels and looks classy. So yeah, I'm really happy with it.
Do you know what? Before we do anything, do you want to introduce yourself to listeners just so they know who you are, a little bit about you?
Absolutely, yeah. So my name is Jamie. Obviously, I'm from Perth, originally from the UK. So I taught in Huddersfield for 6 years. Moved here probably, 2016 now. So I'm still an English teacher and also a school leader as well. So I do kind of bits and pieces of professional development in schools. I love coaching, instructional coaching, and working with teachers and talking about teaching and learning. Hence this book. It's kind of inspired by all my kind of work with teachers and their ideas and their passion and drive for improving student outcomes. So yeah, I'm in a K-12 school, and yeah, I'm loving it at the minute.
What's K-12? What is that?
Yeah, good point. I've been here too long, I think. K-12 just means like kindergarten, so the younger ones, the early years, right through to year 12, which is kind of like the equivalent of, I guess, year 11 in the UK. So GCSE level, and then they go on to, I guess, in Australia, they go on to university after year 12.
And obviously you've been teaching for a while. You mentioned you've been an English teacher, etc. But where did this idea of these like teaching one pages come from? Because I know before you did the book, you were already doing them. So was this like an in-school thing, and then it sort of evolved from there?
Yeah, I mean, like pretty much. I just love to design stuff. So that's one kind of aspect of it. So I mean, one day I was just playing around, and I used to design in Keynote and Pages, sorry, and PowerPoint. So I was just kind of talking to a teacher one day about feedback, and we were having a chat about actionable feedback and kind of setting steps and action points for students to improve the work. And it just kind of led into a discussion of different strategies and ideas, and it's one of those spiraling conversations. And in the end, the guy just said, "Look, can you put this down for me and summarize it?" And I went, "Oh, that's a pretty good idea, actually." We were talking about some really key things, like, for example, Tom Sherrington's 5 R's approach, for example, which is in the book as well, like redraft and redo and whatnot. And I just thought that would make a really nice visual. And then one thing led to another, and it ended up being like a nice little summary. Obviously not quite as sophisticated as they are now, but it was a good starting point. And that was probably about 2 years ago.
I think the idea, and really that's the topic for today's show, is more this idea of these 5 one-pagers that every teacher needs to know about. And this idea of the sort of the one pager, I suppose that ties in with the idea that teachers are very busy. Teachers do not lack sort of if you like, the desire to learn more, and there's so many teachers out there who love to get immersed in CPD and all the rest of it. But equally, there has been that push in the last few years, particularly in the publishing world, for things that are more digestible, for things that are more sort of reference materials, maybe that you can dip into and take something out of. And this book really fits into that mold, doesn't it? In fact, the whole one-pager methodology fits into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And John Catt do exceptional books in that sense, that you can pick them up, generally quite visual. I'm just thinking of walkthroughs in particular at the minute, how powerful that's been. And that's been definitely inspirational, for this book as well. Obviously, Oliver Caviglioli's design work and whatnot has really inspired my own. But yeah, you're right. I think teachers are incredibly busy. There's a lot of pressure on teachers day to day, and the time they have to sit down and read perhaps is not as it's not really as open as it should be. And teachers often go home and they've got kids to look after, like myself, and marking to do, and there's pressure from management or leadership to do certain other things in schools that takes time. So basically the gap for any professional development is narrowed, especially with reading books and getting yourself immersed in literature. So anything that's as I guess concise and to the point, and something you can just dip in and out of, is really important. And that was my intention with this book as well. I didn't really want it to be tied to any context either. And what I mean by that is I didn't want it to be, subject specific or primary or secondary. I wanted any teacher, regardless of their background, to be able to pick it up and relate to it. And so far, when I've actually spoken to people who've got a copy, it's been very well received. It's not actually out in Australia yet, so it's weird when I actually see someone with it and in the hand. So I think I'm the only person carrying it around in my school like a bit of a weirdo. But yeah, it's really good, a really good reception. People say the things that I want to hear, and that's why I wrote it for them. To make it accessible.
Before we sort of get into it a little bit more, and obviously there's the front cover, I wondered whether the colours is something that you consciously thought about, or if that's just something that was fluke. The sort of blue and the black and the white, is that just a random thing, or is that something you thought about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is something I thought about because, as I said to you, I'm really big on design, and I just wanted to kind of create my own style, something that, people can recognize and people would relate to me and what I want to achieve, and create my own kind of design patterns. So it actually came out of a conversation I had with Oliver Caviglioli and David Goodwin a few years ago when we were talking about a similar project to this. And, I guess one bit of advice from Oliver was, you need to find your own style and your own set of designs and illustrations. And since then, I've kind of really knuckled down and started to practice. As we know, the power of practice. I've just been relentlessly drawing and tracing and refining design work and looking at colors and layouts and stuff. So I've actually learnt a lot in terms of the software, which is Adobe Illustrator I use now, and Adobe InDesign for the actual layout. So yeah, I guess I'm quite proud of myself in a way, because I actually kind of put it all into the InDesign myself and then just sent it to the publisher and they just tweaked it a little bit. So yeah, I've kind of learned a lot in the last 2 years, not just writing, but designing.
Well, that's why I asked, because the design effort is pretty immaculate with this one in terms of, you know, just the illustrations and the way it's put together. So, you know, I'm sure even people who aren't involved in design out there will know how much time and effort goes into doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually contributed to another John Catt book in 2021, in which David Goodwin brought one out and Oliver Caviglioli on organize ideas. So my contribution to that was like some graphic organizers called visual instruction plans, which also inspired a lot of the work in this book as well, because you might have noticed as you flick through, there's quite a lot of, you know, diagrams with boxes and arrows and like containers and paths and whatnot, which help to sequence ideas and chunk ideas down. So, you know, it's all been like a big learning effort back from like 2021, 2022, and just trying to kind of refine my approach. When that's just, you know, generally my writing style as well, and not simply the design, but all of it.
Give us a bit of an overview then of what is in this book and what the book actually contains.
Yeah. Well, you know, when I was planning it, I thought, how can I structure a set of summaries around a concept or an idea? And the best structure I could think of, and I'm still really happy with it, is actually the learning and memory chapter, the first one. That was the initial idea, to structure all the summaries around learning and memory. And what I mean by learning and memory is it was inspired essentially by Daniel Willingham. So Daniel T. Willingham, the professor of psychology at the University of Virginia. I'm sure you know him, and I'm sure that you are familiar with his book, which is Why Don't Students Like School? You know, I know many educators have read it and are super inspired by his ideas on, you know, learning, working memory and long-term memory and whatnot. So I thought that'd be a kind of a perfect framework for the summaries to hinge upon. And, you know, for example, I've got like lots of summaries on working memory and based on long-term memory and how we can, you know, build schema and whatnot. So that's how it started. And then from that point on, I thought, oh, well, I can do more now. And then I thought, oh, I'll do another chapter. I'll do another collection. And that ended up being expert teaching principles. So 6 key principles for teaching and learning in the classroom. So instructional principles. And then, you know, I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, I might as well go one step further and make it a 3-chapter book. And, you know, I went to a Research Ed conference at the end of last year in Perth, and Tom Bennett was there. And, you know, Tom Bennett's work is sensational and, you know, so inspirational on X. So obviously I went along, and he was talking about classroom culture and behavior. And I thought it'd make a fantastic last chapter of the book in terms of classroom culture. So that's kind of how I went with it, those 3 main collections.
Brilliant. And obviously, when you open the book, you are sort of led into these one pages. Okay, you have them sorted, as you say, into 3 collections or chapters and 3 big, would you call them principles? I don't know, but you've got these different areas, right? And then you go into the one pages. Now, obviously, in this show, we don't have time to go through all of them. I mean, how many are in it?
Yeah, good question. There's 57 altogether. 57 one pages. Yeah. So I couldn't quite get to the 60, but I nearly did.
Yeah. So we're not going to go through all of them here on TTR, but we will look at some of them as part of this show and really explore the pedagogy and the classroom implications around some of these one pages. So I asked you actually in the lead up to the show, I said, you know, let's pick some, and you chose 5 that you think every teacher needs to know about, and really significant things from those 57. You know, you've had to whittle it down to 5. I'm sure that's very difficult because there's a ton of stuff here that, you know, is absolutely fundamental to teaching. I was going to actually say, Jamie, I mean, do you think that these are things that are fundamentals to teachers? I mean, what proportion of the book do you think is, if you like, new, as it, or is it more bringing those really well embedded ideas into a really good framework for teachers?
I think the framework helps, but I think the first collection in particular are essential elements that all teachers need to know, because as Daniel Willingham outlines in his book, that without students thinking, no learning takes place. And learning is a change in long-term memory. So we need students to think hard in class, and we need, for example, to secure their attention. We need them to have manageable information to work with and process, and then encode in long-term memory, and then subsequently that retrieval and generative processes, to recall information as well. So I think that those fundamental elements are the 5 elements of this model, which is showing on the screen now, which is obviously Oliver's diagram from I think from walkthroughs, but I included it in this book. It's unbeatable. I can't beat that. It really illustrates the learning process perfectly and explains how learning happens, but sometimes how it doesn't. So I think that's fundamental for teachers to know, and it's a really nice framework as well to put the one pages into.
Well, our number one is obviously securing attention. You've chosen this one as a really important one that every teacher really needs to know about. So just getting into that now, you mentioned here sort of several strategies for securing student attention, such as, reducing environmental distractions and optimizing task design. But which of these methods would you say you found the most effective and relevant in your practice, and which are the bits of this that really are important?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots there that you could go into. I mean, for example, accountable questioning is important, because that helps to maintain cognitive attention in the classroom, to secure that attention from everyone. But I guess that I'm going to kind of come into that a bit later. But the one I've picked out for this really is the idea of stripping out any distractions in the actual environment, which helps to enhance that cognitive attention, because learning is closely tied to our focused attention, and without it, learning can be lost, and our students don't think. So our students can get distracted by numerous factors in the classroom, like wall displays, busy slides, for example. If you overcomplicate your slides, that can impact student attention. So basically, the one I chose for this, it's actually from Peps McRae. So Peps McRae, obviously, if you don't know him, is on X. He's a influential educator, and he's got some a newsletter that comes out called Evidence Snacks, and this is actually from some of his ideas. But one thing Peps says about securing attention is that what we attend to is what we learn. So without that attention, we don't learn anything, as I mentioned. So Peps actually talks about the social distraction elements, the environmental distraction elements, and the instructional distraction element. So as a teacher, we, I guess, have to be aware of all 3. And the social elements are essentially like talking interruptions, lateness, disruptive behaviors. And Peps mentions, to address those kind of things, it's been a bit more well considered and prepared, and perhaps with your team agreeing as a department, for example, not to interrupt lesson time at certain times, or having more of a kind of a behavior structure, or kind of a system with teachers to minimize lateness for students, for example, so they're not distracting the class. The environmental aspect of Peps's ideas are also important as well. So, for example, having classroom arrangements where the focus is on the teacher, because obviously there's been a lot of debate in recent years about rows versus groups and stuff like that. But I think the evidence is clear that, when the classroom's in rows or horseshoes, then the attention is maximized and there's more likely thinking to take place. So those are the kind of, environmental elements as well. And then finally, the instructional elements. How can we optimize our instruction as teachers, to ensure that our attention, that the kids' attention is on us and on what we're saying, and the information and material been taught. So those, as I said, are things like cutting the clutter from slides, reducing cognitive load in that sense, And then holding students more accountable with questioning, like cold calling or turn and talk, and having routines and systems that hold students more accountable for paying attention in class. So, I mean, just on the slide there, Tom, you've got, have you got students' attention underneath the diagram? And I guess that's the underlying question of this particular aspect, if you like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also, when it comes to that sort of instructional side, I always think of, and I think about myself is sort of setting the students on a task and then carrying on talking at the students. That is a distraction to them if you're constantly narrating random stuff to them all the time because you like the sound of your own voice, which we all do as teachers. But, you've got to limit it a little bit because that ties into that, doesn't it?
I think sometimes it's not about liking the sound of your own voice. I think I do that as well sometimes, but it's because you might feel a bit uncomfortable about the silence.
No, I was joking about liking the sound of my own.
Yeah,
pretty weird. But no, I mean, in terms of, absolutely. I mean, what I just meant in terms of sort of just think I can't leave them to it. I mean, there is that sort of spoon feeding element, isn't there, to it, which can cause a distraction actually.
But I think like sometimes that it's that idea of having the silence is golden, and sometimes you need to give them the time to think, and that means back off. I think like Doug Lemov talks about the Pastores perch, I think it's called, which is having that point in the classroom where you can see a specific view or angle of the class, and it's about just kind of remaining in the corner, just kind of backing off, letting students think, and not kind of overtaking and hoping that learning sticks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's a big emphasis here as well on this whole idea of working memory, isn't there? And how that ties in with attention. I don't know whether you want to sort of just briefly delve into that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this model is that I guess the elements overlap, don't they? So the idea of securing attention and that instructional practice of decluttering slides and presenting information in manageable chunks does tie into working memory, and cognitive load theory. So you can see why on this page, for example, on the right-hand side, I've got like a table, and that table basically is showing the overlaps between the sections. So, for example, we've got like active participation one page. It also applies to cognitive engagement, as well as securing attention. Because it does both. So these one pages don't neatly fit into all these categories. They do overlap, but at the same time, I had to put them somewhere, and I felt that these are in the right places in the book.
And how do you feel that research on things like attention and cognitive psychology, I'm guessing they've underpinned this and the book? Is it, there's a lot of references you use and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I've referenced a lot of research from cognitive science. There's a lot of like familiarity with Daniel Willingham's work and Robert Bjork, numerous others as well that I can't think of now off the top of my head. But some pop up more than others. Like, for example, Daniel Willingham, I guess this particular collection is inspired by him, the simple model of the mind, if you like, which is what Oliver Caviglioli has recreated here in this diagram. So that particular model that Daniel Willingham, talks about in his book, in Why Don't Students Like School, is a simplified version of how we think. And it's this particular collection is inspired by that, by the idea of the environment, the working memory being a site of awareness and thinking, and then the long-term memory being a factual knowledge base of, procedural knowledge that we're almost unaware of. So it's that relationship that underpins pretty much the first collection, but it also runs throughout the book as well. I do allude back to this idea of learning and memory in collection 2 as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, well, that's number 1, securing attention. Let's move on to number 2, which is you've chosen this idea of worked examples as one of the one pages that every teacher needs to know about. So I wondered, to start with, if you can explain what you mean by worked examples, because perhaps there are teachers out there saying, well, I might already do this, but might not know the phrase worked examples.
Yeah, you know what? Worked examples can be quite confusing. I mean, some people define it in different ways. Even I did at one point until like I was researching, for this book. I kind of thought that a completion task was the same as a worked example, just kind of mixed it up in my mind a little bit. So worked examples, they provide step-by-step demonstrations of how to solve a problem or how to complete a task. So that kind of reduces the need for learners to figure it out on their own, which would overburden the working memory. So I guess it kind of makes it easier for learners to understand and follow along when you, as a teacher, model and demonstrate a process step by step. And I think an important thing about worked examples for me is it's like an interactive process as well. When you say you model it step by step, I think some people think that the kids just follow along and write down what you're doing, but there's no interaction between the teacher and the students. But I see it differently. I think it should be definitely an active participation process, where you're asking questions of the students. You are, I guess, asking them to predict, or perhaps kind of like you put a misconception in the worked example and discuss why it's a misconception. So I guess worked examples, are definitely a joint effort between the teacher and the students, but obviously the teacher leads the process and demonstrates each step. So I guess like when I mentioned before about the difference between worked examples and completion tasks, completion tasks are pretty much like once students have built confidence and gained proficiency in an area, you would then like employ completion tasks where you would remove, like some of the steps that they have to fill in themselves on a different problem. So it's kind of, like weaning them off the worked example and then giving them a little bit more independence for them to, to kind of fill in the gaps and have a go themselves, essentially, to help them build fluency, if you like.
Yeah, for sure. And you also mentioned this sort of idea of putting in some making deliberate mistakes is posed as a strategy. So I wondered, maybe you could elaborate on how introducing sort of errors strategically can benefit student learning and understanding with this.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, it kind of relates back to the idea of giving examples and non-examples. What a good example looks like, but then what an unsuccessful example looks like at the same time. When students can see the difference between the two, they can, it kind of helps to strengthen their understanding a little bit. So when I'm teaching English, for example, and I'm writing a model paragraph on the board with the class, or I'm, doing a worked example, a step-by-step process, I might put like, a different definition in, or a different word, or unusual piece of vocabulary that doesn't really fit, with the context of the paragraph. And it might be a case of just saying, right, turn and talk to your partner. What's wrong with this paragraph? What's wrong with this sentence? And then, cold calling individual pairs to give a response. And that just kind of brings attention to, perhaps a common error that people might use. It might just be a phrase or a word they've got mixed up, or it might be something that as a department with colleagues, you often see this mistake come up in exams or in assessments, and you think, oh, well, how can we avoid this from the offset? And it might be everyone builds that into their worked examples and kind of has that discussion with the class about it. So yeah, I mean, that's what I mean when, drip in deliberate misconceptions in order to raise them as issues in the class that you can then deconstruct.
Got you. Also, there's this element of alternating between I do teacher modeling and you do student practice, and that's sort of in there, sort of recommended. But what are the key factors, do you think, in deciding when and how frequently to switch between teacher doing and student doing?
I think it boils down to being a responsive teacher. So you have to kind of be aware of students' progress in your class. And if they are struggling, you take it back a step and you take the baton back, and you perhaps work on a little bit more of one step than you normally would, just to kind of maybe show them again and reinforce a step. Sometimes like it's good to have like mini whiteboards too, where they can practice a step after you've modeled it. I know that relates back to Baruch Rosenshine's principles of instruction. He does talk a lot about practice and being followed by a model, modeling then practice afterwards. So I guess that could be a part of it as well. If students aren't quite grasping something, you might teach them again and get them to practice in a low stakes manner, with a show me board instead of writing it in the books. So anything that's more like low stakes, less threatening, something that they can practice with, can help, build that fluency and build that independence.
And you mentioned this idea of the think alouds.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether you can dig into that for anybody who might not have a clue what that's sort of to do with.
Yeah, I've actually got a separate one pager on thinking aloud. And thinking aloud, I thought it was important because it relates back to metacognition and students being aware of their thinking process. So the reason why it's important for teachers to think aloud is because it reveals the inner expert to students. It's like it's like showing them behind the curtain of how an expert does stuff, really well. So I guess you externalize your processes, your ideas.
You're narrating your thoughts.
Absolutely, yeah. So like, I'll go back to my example as an English teacher. Like when I'm writing, I might be typing it, on the board, and they might see how I'm actually typing it, or I might actually write it on the board with a pen. But as I'm doing that, I would definitely say why I am doing it and what choices I'm making. And again, just like with the worked examples, it would be an interactive process. So it's not just all up to me to externalize my knowledge, but it also brings in participation from students. You might ask them to, how did we do this last time, for example, is a good question. Or, how does this relate to a similar problem we did last lesson? And just kind of bringing them into the conversation and bringing them into the thought process. But yeah, basically this whole thing of thinking aloud helps students to develop their own internal voice. So when, they have enough kind of exposure to that, over time, they'll start to think themselves in the head of how to approach a problem. So it's kind of modeling how to be metacognitive and have control over what you're learning and making strategic decisions, when you're solving a problem. And it's a way of modeling that to the students.
Spot on. What a conversation. We've got the second part coming up in just a moment. But before I bring Jamie back, this is a big shout with John Catt. His book is published through John Catt. So if you're enjoying this conversation, you're interested in finding out a little bit more, visit the John Catt Bookshop website, find Jamie's book on there, Teaching One Pages. Use the discount code JCTTR2425 for 20% off the book. Make sure you get it. Get out there right now. Go and buy the book. It's absolutely fantastic. We've still got 3 more of these to go. So I'm going to bring Jamie back on now, and we're going to head into the third one-pager that you have chosen, which is around activating prior knowledge, which is such a big topic, isn't it, for teachers?
It's kind of trending at the minute, isn't it? Activating prior knowledge.
It is a bit,
you get things that trend, I think, on X especially. But this particular one pager is part of the building knowledge category within the first collection. So far we've had the idea of securing attention being part of learning and memory. We've had working memory being part of learning and memory as well. And then the third part out of 5 is building knowledge is important for learning and memory as well. So the idea of building knowledge to start with is the kind of idea that we have to help our students to integrate new knowledge into what they already know. And I guess that's an underlying principle of cognitive science. We have to encourage learners to build networks of knowledge, which is referred to as schemas. And that kind of helps them to I guess, connect other ideas and build bigger webs of knowledge, so then they know more things and can connect more things together. So as teachers, it's up to us really to help students relay information, to connect it, to integrate new ideas. And, we can do that by activating prior knowledge, which is why I identified this particular summary. So the cognitive scientist or cognitive psychologist, I believe, David Ausubel, he talks a lot about, the idea of the importance of prior knowledge and relating things to what learners already know. So this one pager is definitely useful for teachers who want to implement, perhaps do nows at the beginning of a lesson and whatnot. But I chose this one because it's actually got at the bottom left some ideas from Sarah Cottinghat. So Sarah is an educator on X, and she wrote a book for John Catt again. Lots of John Catt books popping up here. But she wrote a book called Meaningful Learning, I think it was, last year. So that was a hugely successful book. It's based on David Ausubel's work. And basically, sometimes we often make assumptions that students don't have prior knowledge on things, and we often think that they don't need to be reminded of what they already know. And sometimes we, make lots of mistakes in just kind of plowing on through content without doing this first step. So I guess for me, the kind of process that Sarah talks about in her book is to be explicit. And, when you are teaching something new, you tell students how the ideas connect and how new ideas connect with existing knowledge. And basically you design tasks in the lesson that allows them to make connections and integrate new knowledge with what they already know. So it's specifically about task design, and it's specifically about creating bodies of knowledge and not islands of knowledge. And we can do that, by giving visual overviews of topics, using graphic organizers to organize ideas into hierarchies, perhaps, using advanced organizers as well, which are, I guess, information you give to students before you teach a new concept to preload them about it. So there's different ways we can do it. And as I said, it's important in helping them kind of make information come to the fore, so then they can connect new ideas to it.
I mean, I'm just trying to draw out the key bit from this one pager, really, in terms of what the thing that in there that's just sort of intrinsic to it, because to many teachers will feel like they do this in a variety of ways, but perhaps there might be something they're overlooking, or perhaps there might be something that they're not thinking about enough. I wondered, from your perspective, what might be that one sort of misconception, or that one thing that some teachers miss around this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think one thing that I didn't do personally is probably teach the general concepts first before drilling down into more specific ones. I think you need to start broad and then narrow it down. Now, on this one pager and in other works I've read on Sarah Cottinghat's work, she said, like, for example, students who are taught about democracy will find it easier to assimilate detailed ideas from different historical periods related to this topic if it's kind of learned about in detail first, and then you plan your curriculum about the idea of patriarchy and democracy first, and then go into specific details about examples from history. So I guess it's been broad and then narrowing it down in order to to kind of help students link ideas contextually.
No, absolutely. And I think a lot of it is sort of, again, it's one of those things that, like you said, is trending, and that's perhaps because it's one of the things that, because it's so fundamental, maybe sometimes it has been overlooked in the conversations around teaching and learning, and what every teacher sort of needs to do. So it's interesting you've chosen it. Completely understand why. Let's move on to number 4 that you've chosen, which is the old think, pair, share. Now, obviously, I know that many people, Dylan Willem, Kate Jones, lots of people have talked about think, pair, share in terms of how it can go wrong. But first of all, why have you chosen to make a 1-pager about think, pair, share?
It's always like, it's one of those things for me where, you know, when I used to do this, sometimes it didn't go right. You know, I wasn't happy with it. And I'd say, you know, like, I'll think to yourself, and then the kids that kind of think a little bit, it didn't really kind of go as smoothly as I'd like it to, like, a lot of the time. And then the second bit, they wouldn't really share properly, and, you know, they wouldn't really have that much of a deep discussion about it. They wouldn't really know what to say to each other and how to say it and what to address. And then finally, you know, the sharing bit might have been rushed a little bit. You know, this is my personal practice. So since then, I thought, oh, well, I'm really going to knuckle down and try and make this work. And I've done that by scaffolding think, pair, share. So the reason why I picked this 1-pager, Tom, really is because I think scaffolding think, pair, share is really important to ensure it's successful. And what I mean by scaffolding it is that diagram there on the right-hand page. I teach this to the students. So It's a visual step-by-step how to do think, pair, share. All right. So it kind of teaches them each part and suggests, you know, like, things to focus on. And I'm just going to get mine up on my screen so I can talk about it a bit more. And it also gives them some sentence starters as well, you know, to think about. So so the reason I picked this is because, you know, it helps to give some more structure to this routine, and it can be more successful if this is taught. So for example, you know, the second strand there, the paired part, the conduct the discussion, I'll just go through, you know, how I would teach this to the kids. I'd say, you know, like, in this part, you're going to be working with a partner. And I want you to exchange ideas, discuss ideas while listening attentively. And it might be explaining what listen attentively means and asking nuanced questions.
And looks like.
In order to, so basically, it's training them to be active listeners and to ask the right questions. So in order to do that, you need to model that as well, and give some suggested questions too. You know, so for example, on this this diagram here, I've got, you know, what ideas will I put forward? How do my partner's ideas improve mine? How will they actively listen? It's prompting them to think about these skills, and then, you know, also kind of addressing how you're going to wait for your partner to finish, ask any questions to clarify, give any supporting examples and whatnot. So I guess this whole structured discussion really helped this go well for me, and this whole scaffold kind of guided them through it.
I mean, I was actually going to ask you about the questions that you tell the students to ask during the pair stage. Do you sort of instruct them on dialogue, or do you just leave that up to them?
Sometimes I've done it once. I think I've actually got 2 kids to the front and you know, shown and demonstrated what a good example looks like. Because I've heard them, you know, talk before, and pretty decent students, and you know, said, can you model, you know, what a good paired discussion looks like? Obviously, after teaching this process as well and giving them an attempt to do it, we, you know, we'd kind of like go over it again at the front, and the kids would demonstrate a good, effective discussion with, you know, nuanced questions, and we'd discuss how, you know, how it's different perhaps to an unsuccessful example.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And the image on there as well depicts these sort of potential think products like notes or drawings or examples students might generate. So how do you advise sort of varying or specifying these think products? Is that something that you would specify, or is that something you just say, you know what, you just do it yourself?
Well, those prompts are like reminding students when they're thinking to remember what they've learned before. So do they remember a specific diagram they drew? Do they remember, you know, any summary they made with the teacher? Do they remember any important concepts, you know, based on the question they've been asked? So it's getting them it's prompting them to remember and recall information that they've learned in class, whether that's visual or written or summarized. But yeah, I was going to say, what was I going to say now? I've forgotten. Okay, carry on.
That's okay. I was going to
Yeah.
ask you as well about the share stage, and in terms of like, obviously you've mentioned in there that it's not just about sharing their own ideas, but also about their partner's perspective or ideas, and that is something that can be forgotten, can't it, in the share stage? You know, this idea of what have you actually done in the pair stage.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's definitely a way to determine and check their understanding, but it's also a good way to get them to collaborate, you know, and make sure their points are refined, and their perspectives are acknowledged. You know, we obviously want students to feel heard, and I think the idea of cognitive engagement, going back to this, you know, this main element of this particular section, you know, is that all students are cognitively engaged because they have to be part of the discussion. And this structured diagram does help promote active participation, and essentially all students are accountable in terms of they have to think and put an opinion forward. You know, not in a threatening way by any means, but just kind of prompting them all to share their ideas, and, you know, each one being a valid point. So it's important to teach your class that as well, about, you know, respect and obviously active listening, but the idea of respect and you know, being open to other people's perspectives as well. So that's one thing I try to stress, you know, about this process. But for me, it's helped, you know, this whole scaffolded approach, and it does help all students think. It would have been easy for me to pick out in this section something like cold calling, because obviously that does help drive all thinking, doesn't it? You know, when you're strategically picking people to respond, and, you know, they're expected to form an answer. But, you know, equally, I think pair share can be extremely powerful if it's structured right, if it's taught properly, and if it's scaffolded to support students who perhaps forget how to have those structured discussions.
Definitely. And this is what I like about the book, is it does draw your attention towards things that perhaps you may otherwise have overlooked. And, you know, you can sort of delve back into some ideas that perhaps you've embedded into your teaching, or even forgotten that are embedded into your teaching, and reassess how you're actually delivering them, like Think, Pair, Share as one example of that. And there are many others in the 57 one pages in the book that you could probably sort of allude to as well in that sense.
I think the one pages are a refresher, you know, for educators who are, you know, perhaps more experienced, who've done a lot of this, you know, in the past. It's just a refreshing summary, but then also it's a good tool for, you know, perhaps NQTs or early career teachers to learn something new as well and build knowledge.
Just before we move on to 5, going up along the bottom of the screen, but also I'm going to tell listeners that you can get this book from Jamie at the John Catt Bookshop, johncatbookshop.com. You can get 20% off it by using the code JCTTR2425 off the order. 20% off the new book, Teaching One Pages by Jamie Clark, available now, johncatbookshop.com. So we're going to move on now, Jamie, to the very last one you've picked. I think it's the last one anyway. I'm losing track myself where we're up to. Just shows that. Wow, I think it is. We've done 4. I'm now to unveil 5. The 5th one that you have picked is, drum roll, we haven't got sound effects, is Low Stakes Recall. So you've chosen Low Stakes Recall as your 5th one page that every teacher needs to know about. So with regards to this, tell me why you've chosen this one.
So this one fits into the final element of the learning and memory model, which is generative processes. There's obviously a lot of work, you know, done on this, and lots of educators are very big on like retrieval practice, for example. But this ties back to that and the idea of retrieving schema and helping students make more lasting connections between what they already know by, you know, bringing it back from long-term memory, having it back in working memory to strengthen those neural pathways. So I've picked Low Stakes Recall pretty much because I just wanted to emphasize, you know, that having a bank of strategies that helps students to recall information can help, you know, keep learning, I guess, exciting and make it also meaningful at the same time, rather than just doing a quiz every lesson, for example. So it's having, I guess, a variety of different strategies in your toolkit that can help you help the students at the same time. So basically, I just want to allude to some research here that Robert Bjork is definitely very much a prominent figure when it comes to, you know, learning and memory, and especially when it comes to retrieval practice and desirable difficulties and whatnot. And, you know, Robert Bjork says, you know, using your memory shapes your memory. So in other words, that means, you know, like in order to strengthen your capacity to remember information, it needs to be used. You need to challenge yourself. Pooja Agarwal from retrievalpractice.org, for example, talks about pulling information out of your head is more beneficial than sometimes putting information in your head, because it's more challenging, you know, to remember things from memory, and it helps to strengthen learning. So the whole premise of this particular one pager is strategies that help you maximize learning in the classroom. And the subtitle to this actual one pager, I love it, is hiding the broccoli in the brownies. Hiding the broccoli in the brownies. So that's by Dr. Megan Sumeracki, who's one of the learning scientists. And the reason I like it is because, you know, you've got to kind of add a variety of retrieval practice strategies in your classroom in order to, you know, keep learning fresh and whatnot.
Yeah, because there is that sort of criticism.
Yeah,
I've seen in part of sort of, oh, it's this sort of routine of do a quiz and then PowerPoint and then quiz, and every lesson has to have it, and it has to be the same format, and it has to even have the same branding on it, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
But, you know, sort of, would you say that is a lethal mutation of low stakes recall?
Yeah, I think when anything that's mandatory and put into like a policy and a structure can, you know, lose its effect. You know, the kids won't respond to it in the same way. And it's,
well, you
it's
mentioned
not
earlier responsive teaching, didn't you? So it's sort of a little bit like that, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if you think students require, you know, retrieval practice or a recall activity, and it's something that's going to help them, you know, remember key information, key knowledge, then by all means. But as you know, lots of people have said on blogs and whatnot, having it as a mandatory process can detract from learning, and it doesn't have the same impact.
And also, you talk about, you know, implementing these recall activities throughout the learning cycle and not just at the end, you know, and sort of, I suppose that's part of it, isn't it? In terms of, oh, we've got our do now and retrieval at the start of every lesson. It's like, no, let's embed it. Let's make sure it's through everything and embedded through everything.
Yeah, and I think one important point to raise about that also is it also helps students to identify what they don't know as well. So that's probably why, you know, it's not just about remembering things, but it's also helping them, you know, have feedback on what they need to do or what they need to remember to improve, you know, in next time, what learning gaps they have as a teacher. That's incredibly important as well. So I guess this whole section of the book is about how we can maximize and help students recall information more effectively. And it does go back to, you know, Robert Bjork's work, as I mentioned, in terms of spacing learning and interleaving, not, you know, doing the same topic all the time, but perhaps kind of leaving a gap, because that healthy forgetting makes learning more challenging when you're trying to remember something over a spaced out period of time, which helps to strengthen learning, you know, ironically.
And you also talk about questioning itself, don't you? So, you know, you can see on the screen now, if people are watching this, some might be listening to it, but, you know, you've talked about this asking how and why sort of questions, and, you know, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, this particular strategy that I've listed on here is something called elaborative interrogation. So there's actually a one pager in this section as well on elaborative interrogation. But yeah, you're right. It's about asking how and why questions. So asking
as opposed to what?
Yeah, as opposed to what? Yeah, because like how and why helps them to generate and recall information how a process happens. So the example I've got in the book is from how a plane takes off. Which is actually comes back to a cognitive scientist called Dr. Jana Weinstein, who proposed this in a paper. And she was like, you know, how does elaborative interrogation work? Well, it's pretty much about asking the why and how questions. For example, in how an aeroplane takes off. I'm just going to find my example now. I can't find it. It's like, you know, why, why is there a downwash behind the wing or something? And there's different questions you can ask in terms of how flight happens. What is the force pushing the airplane down and things like that? Or why does this happen? Those kind of questions. I can't find the actual page now. That's why I'm struggling to remember the questions. Here we go. So it's, why does a plane need an engine? Why is there a downwash behind the wings? How does a plane take off? How does upward force lift work? So it might be a case the kids would do this in pairs, or maybe they do it by themselves and write down the questions and then recall the answers or generate the answers afterwards to help that self-talk and help them remember and retrieve information. So that's essentially in a nutshell what elaborative interrogation is, and it's alluded to on this page as well.
We've sort of touched on this, but beyond quizzing and self-explaining, are there any other low stakes recall strategies that you frequently use or sort of recommend? Maybe, I don't know, just things that you might have used in terms of low stakes recall. I guess quizzing is the one, isn't it, really?
Quizzing's the main one, but I would say a specific type of quizzing can help, and that's multiple choice quizzing. Because multiple choice questions, when they're written effectively, can be incredibly powerful for determining what students know and what they don't. People often write multiple choice questions incorrectly, and often have too obvious answers in multiple choice questions, where the students just know what the right answer is by how poorly the other answer stems are written. So on the particular one pager that I've written on multiple choice questions, it's like, how can we write more clearer and focused sentence stems? How can we design effective answer choices that have plausible distractors, for example? So I guess that one pager for me is quite powerful as well, because it helps you really refine the questions you ask. And that's definitely what I've been doing now. When I write my multiple choice questions, I might use it as a hinge question in the class and make that multiple choice format, but be really conscious of how I write that and craft that particular question. So again, there's another one page on hinge questions as well.
There is.
As I said, these all interlink, and that's, I guess, the overarching idea here is that these all tie in together, a lot of these underlying concepts. But I'd say multiple choice questions are very powerful for different purposes.
Brilliant. That was the 5, Jamie, that we've run through. 5 one pages that every teacher needs to know about. Now, obviously, there are 57 in the book in total. That's a huge amount of knowledge and expertise that's there ready to disseminate to teachers when they need to pick it up and use it. It's been absolutely fantastic to be able to talk through those 5 things with you. How do you, I know I sort of touched on this at the beginning, but how would you like teachers to use the Teaching One Pages book?
I've just launched an implementation pack, actually, because I think and it's a downloadable resource that teachers and leaders can use to implement one pages into existing professional learning. Because I think it can be used alongside initiatives, like instructional coaching, maybe PD workshops. And there's been lots and lots of educators who've reached out to me and asked, it's really good. We're going to use it for instructional coaching, our feedback meetings. It'll inform discussion, even in really informal, low stakes professional learning. They use, I know a school who do something called a 15-minute forum, which is like a 15-minute sharing session, at breakfast time when staff come in over a coffee. And it might be that, one page is a topic of discussion and linking to some examples from their own classroom, for example. So I guess my initiative, my idea with this initiative was to, spark conversation and develop a culture of professional conversations around teaching and learning. And these are just enough information for staff, for people to grasp without being bogged down with too much, to making it too overwhelming for them, I guess.
No, absolutely brilliant. Certainly, it's something that I'm sure lots of our listeners now, having seen it and heard from you, the explanations around it, are going to be going out and definitely looking at and trying to get hold of. If you are interested in getting it, it is available at johncattbookshop.com. Even to people in Australia. No, not yet. Maybe is it next week, Jamie?
Yeah, I think it's like I don't know. I think it keeps changing. I reckon it's like August or something. They have to wait a long time. Yeah, so I got in lots of messages saying, "When's it coming out? When's it coming out?" And I'm like, "Sorry, I can't make the boat go any faster, but it's been shipped over, and it'll be there soon." But yeah, it'll be worth the wait.
Well, there's certainly there's been a lot of energy and excitement around it. Thanks so much for coming on TTR, and you have your own TTR show coming up on Saturday at 1 p.m. everyone. So Jamie will be here 1 p.m. this Saturday. Do you want to give a little preview what you've got planned for Saturday, even if it's just 30 seconds?
Yeah, so I am doing the Saturday live show, which is going to be. Let me try and get the time sorted, Tom. So in Australia, where I am, it's going to be quite late, so 8 p.m.
Yeah,
and then it's going to be 1 p.m. in the UK, which is lunchtime. Which is why I couldn't really call it the lunch show because it's not my lunch. But anyway, the name's a different matter. But yeah, I'm going to have a special guest on, and I'll announce that very shortly. And yeah, the show will be an hour, and we'll have some deep conversations about teaching. And the show will run every 2 weeks on a Saturday.
Yeah, we can't wait. So yeah, really looking forward to that. First show this Saturday, 1 p.m. As Jamie has said, he will promote it and advertise it in due course. So thanks everybody for joining us this evening. It's been absolutely brilliant. TTR continues to roll on. We got a show at 9 p.m. with Ray, which literally starts more or less as soon as this ends. If you're watching this live, then she's on in about 20 minutes. But if not, if you're watching it on playback, thanks very much for joining us here on TTR. And we will be back again very, very soon.
Full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused